Oh, the WHL was the Western Hockey League.
Okay, yeah.
I played some games out in San Francisco at the end of one season out there. I had finished up in Memphis, and San Francisco was a team in the Western Hockey League, and they had run into goalie problems as far as injuries go. And at that time of year, it was tough for organizations to loan goalies from one team to another because you were approaching playoffs or in the playoffs. And Bud Poyle was the manager of the team out in San Francisco, and Vic Stasiak was my coach in Memphis, and they were very, very close friends. And Vic says, well, I got this young kid, Joe Daley, and played goal for me here, and I'm sure he could fill in and help you out. So I went to San Francisco, and there was 6 games left, or 7 games left, and we won 6 out of the 7 games, I believe, and they made the playoffs by 1 point. Well, of course, in those days, you had to, submit player rosters for playoffs and such, and generally what would happen would the league would take a goaltender off a team that never made the playoffs, and he would be the standby goalie for all of the teams in the playoffs. And so that's why I couldn't play in the playoffs, but thankfully they respected what I had done for them, and they gave me a full playoff split, and I wasn't able to even dress for a playoff game.
Oh, so you didn't make the playoffs in Memphis, so you
Right.
finished for the year?
Yes.
So
basically on loan to San Francisco, which was they were a part of the Boston organization.
Okay, and then you went back to Memphis and you played 49 games there?
Yeah, the next year actually I started in Pittsburgh in the American League, and at Christmas time they asked me to go back to Memphis, which you really didn't have a say. They would have, they probably would have forced me to go if I really didn't want to go. And unfortunately for me, that year was the year that Pittsburgh won the Calder Cup in the American League Championship. But having said that, I went back to Memphis, and we made the playoffs that year, and we had a pretty good run, and that's when Red Sullivan was watching me on behalf of the Pittsburgh Penguins, fell in love with me, and consequently I was their number 1 draft choice in '67 expansion.
Now the Pittsburgh Hornets, were they
That was the American League team. Yeah, that was the Detroit farm team in the American League. Very good team. In fact, Detroit came and played an exhibition game against us that year, and we beat them 8-0 in Pittsburgh.
Was all your travel in those days, everything was bus?
No, we did train travel, we did bus travel, we did air travel. That was the neat thing about the Central League, was there was a lot of air travel. An old rickety plane, but it sure beat being on the road, pounding down the highway in a bus.
Did teams cross each other's paths at the airport?
Not that often. Generally, you would fly at different times, not on the same plane, obviously. So sometimes, but though I've heard stories about teams traveling on trains together back in the original 6 days, and of course, depending on what was happening, and because you'd have a lot of, I don't know whether you remember, but in the original 6, you'd have a lot of games back to back. In other words, you'd play, Detroit would play Toronto on Saturday night in Toronto, and Sunday Toronto would travel to Detroit, and they'd play on Sunday night in Detroit. And so you would have train travel back then, and you might have both teams on the same train. And of course, the old theory was that you wouldn't even say hi to your brother if he was on the other team, because that was a no-no. You just didn't mix very well with the opposition, especially if you had to play against them the next night, type thing.
And now it's like practically go out drinking after.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, you see it in all sports where players will embrace, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, old school guys like John Ferguson would fine you or suspend you if you ever spoke a word to the opposition. And nowadays you see them embracing each other, either certain maybe not before the game, but certainly after the game. And you know what? I think that's the way we are in life these days. Is you go out and compete as hard as you can and as tough as you can. But I mean, I played with a lot of guys that ended up being traded, and we remain friends till this day. And if I can't go out and have a dinner or a beer with my best friend after a game, then I think there's something wrong. So I think it's a little different today than it used to be.
Do you mind telling me how much you made back in those days, like in the American Hockey League?
Oh, well, in the Central League, my first contract was $3,000 for the whole year.
For the whole year?
Not for a game, not for a period, not for a month, for a year. And of course, we started to raise a family on that. So you can imagine that, come training camp the next year, I was looking forward to it because you'd not only get fed, but there was a great possibility you'd get some meal money and or some spending money, and I'd take that money and send it home to my wife so she could survive.
Now, was there a per diem? Was there a team per diem with your city?
Yeah, it started, but I mean, I don't know what it is these days, but I can probably guess that it's well over $100 a day. I think back then it was $12, $15 a day you'd get for meal money, and that would provide you with a pretty good. Even if you had to eat the whole day, breakfast, lunch, and supper, you could do it on $15 back in those days.
Was there a perception when you came home in the summer, like, oh, Joe's pro? Was there a perception that everyone was rolling in the bucks?
I'll tell you, I met a guy that I went to school with. It would have been '72, and I had just spent the winter in Detroit, the whole year in Detroit. Was probably considered the number one goalie, certainly at the start of the year. Maybe didn't end up the year that way. But I came home, and my old schoolmate says, "Joe, I haven't seen you for years. What are you doing these days?" I said, I go away for the winter. So, I've been pretty humble my whole life, and like to think I still am today. I mean, here's a kid I went to school with, didn't even know I had a hockey career going. So, no, people might have thought that it was pretty neat to have an athletic career going, but the perception of being wealthy was never there. We didn't, mind you, I don't think many players bragged about what they were making because, to be honest with you, most of us were probably embarrassed by the fact that we were making this amount of money. But nobody knew what each other was making. And that was the neat thing, that you could go out and have a few beers with your teammate, and that was never a discussion that came up, was how much you were making, how much he was making, how much so-and-so was making on another team. It was just probably an assumption of ours that, well, I'm getting as much as they can afford to pay me, and there's probably nobody on the team making a heck of a lot more unless he's a superstar, and if he's a superstar, he won't be here long anyways. So we never worried about what each other was making, and we didn't worry about how much we were making as individuals. It was something that you said, hey, I guess I'm getting what they can afford to pay me, and you tried to live on it. And I think that's the player has a distinct advantage today in that regard, because if you're a decent player, all you have to do is take a look at the rest of the league and see what players that you would rank yourself alongside of, and see what they're making. And if you've got a good agent, he should be able to get you that kind of dollar. So I think the players have the advantage today. The owners are at a disadvantage. Although I will confess that the owners pretty much raped us back in the day as far as a paycheck went, but we had no way of knowing. We had no way of challenging them as far as what we were making, because there was 10 guys in line waiting for your job anyway. So you took what you could get and made sure you played well. you know, you look back on those days and you think how fortunate you were to have been able to play with certain players and play against certain players and play in certain buildings, and those buildings don't exist anymore, and the history of what those games presented was tremendous.
Yeah. I'm here and the crowds. Or was it a gradual thing?
Yeah, I think you grow into it along with being able to be there, being able to have the ability to play there. That, you know, the awe of it all is it's there initially, but then as time goes on, it fades away, and I think you feel like, okay, I belong, and I think that's the biggest thing is you want to be well liked, so you want to be well liked by your teammates, you want to be liked by the fans, and you certainly want to have everybody, I think, feel like you deserve to be there by your play, and so it's not something that it's not something I think you expect. It's something you have to earn, but you know, you feel like, okay, I've progressed along the way. I've taken the steps that I had to take, and now that I'm here, it's just a matter of playing well enough to stay here. And I think that's the biggest thing is you're always on edge about being able to play to stay. It wasn't until I came home in '72 and signed a longer term contract that that those weren't thoughts in my mind. I had enough confidence to feel that between me and my partner Ernie Wakely, that we, you know, I felt we were the best tandem in the league, and till this day I think we were. And Ernie should have never been let go from Winnipeg. We should have been able to partner up through all 7 years here and partake in all the victories we did. But it just turned out differently for he and I was fortunate enough to stay on, and thank God I did, and thank God that the organization kept me, and I was able to partake in some of the great teams we had here in the championships. And but I think that, you know, by that time in my career, I felt that I had proven that I could play the game and at the highest level, and so I was quite comfortable in my own skin, if I can use that term.
Yeah. Back then, like in the '60s, did a team give you okay, you got one set of goalie pads, or was this all your stuff? Did you have
No, the team provided everything for you, and it would generally travel with you if you went to the minors, obviously, or if you got traded. It was just tools of the trade that each team considered the goalie's equipment, and so you wouldn't have to go from one team or one organization to another and all of a sudden start off from scratch with new equipment.
And they always say goalies have superstitions. Did you have any?
I don't call them superstitions. It was just things you wanted done in a certain way, and you wanted your equipment in a certain place in the locker, and the equipment guys, they end up whereby they know that. So, you know, they see how it's hung by you day in and day out, and so they make sure that doesn't change. And you know, how you address, I think that's probably the biggest thing is your preparation for the game. You put on pieces of equipment at a certain way at a certain time, and so it's all. But that is all just a mental part of the game, and it becomes a mental part of you. And you know, they say the goalies are different, and we're screwy, and we're this and we're that. It's, well, we certainly we play a unique and a different position than everybody else. We have to be a little bit different, and I think in the fact that we are you know who we are. I think in that sense that. We dress differently. We play a different position. There's a lot of things that are different about a goalie just because of the position you play. So never mind the makeup or character of the person. Actually, Buffalo made a pre-deal with Pittsburgh before the draft of Vancouver and Buffalo coming into the league, and so Buffalo Punch made a deal to get me from Pittsburgh. So I was actually the first player ever. So if you look on the Buffalo website, you'll see that I was the first Sabre ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They saw it a week or a day before the draft.
Yeah.
You were
Yeah.
actually the first guy.
Yeah.
Well, they always say you build a team from the backbone. Right?
Well, and then he drafted, and I mean,
You go up, I
Okay, okay.
he drafted well, and I mean, the old spin of the wheel. He got Perreault, and Vancouver got Talon, and the rest is history. I mean, that probably was what set Buffalo in motion, and certainly, getting Richard Martin and Perreault to play together there. The French Connection line was really special for Buffalo, but unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever you want to say, I played the 1 year in Buffalo, and Punch wanted to start building his team up, and he tried to trade Dave Dryden to Detroit, but Detroit wanted to get me, and so he gave me up for Lucien Robitaille, and he phoned me and told me, Joe, I'm making a deal with Detroit for you, and so I went back to the Detroit organization. But I remember Davey Keon telling me, he said, Punch must have liked you a lot, because whenever he traded a player, you usually found out in the newspaper or on the radio, and he said that for him to phone you and tell you what he was going to do was quite different of the way he did things. And but I enjoyed my time in Buffalo. It was a good experience playing on an expansion team again, and so everybody can't play on a winner. I was just happy to be playing again.
Was it exciting? Like here to the NHL now after just 3 years, expanding again. Were they exciting times or?
Well, yeah. I mean, I always felt like every time teams were added to the league, it was creating more jobs, and so it was. I don't want to say it was making life easier for players that were in the league, but it certainly. I mean, teams had to be stocked, so you always felt like, okay, there's another 2 goalies positions opening up, and so if things don't work out here, maybe they'll work out somewhere else. But I think once you're playing the game and once you're in it, I don't know. Maybe I was naive, but I always thought that there would be a place for Joe to play somewhere. Joe's going to play hockey somewhere, and of course, your dream is to play in the National Hockey League. But I think I would have played in Timbuktu if I had to.
Yeah. Was back then? Was there were they into the 2 goalie combination thing at that?
It was just starting. Yeah, I mean, obviously in the first expansion there was, because the reason I got chosen by Pittsburgh was they had bought Les Binkley out of the American League, and so they had Les was an older goaltender, experienced, and so that's why they went with a young guy like me in their draft. So yeah, it was starting then, whereby the teams would have 2 goalies.
What was the reasoning? What was the reasoning for that? Just having the 2 goalies.
Well, I don't want to say that it was a rule coming in, but I think it made sense. I mean, if you look back, in fact, in 66, 67, when Toronto won the, I think it was 66, when Toronto last won their Stanley Cup, they had Bauer and Sawchuk. So it made a lot of sense, because it was a great opportunity for teams to have a veteran goalie and a young goalie, and so the young guy would be the one that would play the fewer games, but he was also being tutored and brought along by the team, so that when the old guy was on his way out, then the young guy was ready to go. Yeah. And it made a lot of sense. And mind you, nowadays you see teams that have got they've got two goalies, and they're basically competing for time. And you know, is it good? It's the way it is. I mean, it's not easy to have a Brodeur and a Corey Schneider on your team, so where you've got the guy that's on his way out and the guy coming up. So, I mean, some teams have to have what they have, and so they have their young. You know, a lot of organizations have a young guy playing in the American League, but they also have two young guys playing on the top team.
And you guys used to share your points, right? Your goals against back then, like the Heisman Trophy was won by the.
Yeah, it would be won by the team, right? Yeah. It wasn't an individual. It's basically you know, an individual award, or at least it started out to be, but now it's a team award.
Yeah. Okay, so you went back to Detroit. Who was the coach back then?
Doug Barkley. Doug Barkley started the year coaching that year. Got fired, and Johnny Wilson took over. Both ex-players, both ex-Detroit Red Wing players. And Ned Harkness was the general manager, and of course he had come out of a very successful career at Cornell, I believe, coaching college hockey, and his philosophies were a little different, and his way of dealing with players was a little different, and I don't think it boded well. And you know, his success wasn't that great, mind you. When he went to Detroit, they were going through the throes of rebuilding, and yeah, the year I was there was the first year that Gordy wasn't playing for them, and you know, Alex Delvecchio was still there, Gary Bergman was still there, and Mickey Redmond, but and of course Marcel Dion was a rookie that year, but primarily, yeah, it was see you, Rilbo. A rebuilding time for the Red Wing organization, and so it was a tough time for me, and you know, they went through for many years, even going into the 80s there, when Yzerman was their springboard, and I mean, if you remember how many years he toiled sort of on his own before success came his way, and so. You know, it was a storied organization with Gordie Howe and Terry Sawchuk and Ted Lindsay and players of that ilk there. But I think what happened was they stuck with the grizzled veterans for a long time, and in the end paid the price of not infiltrating youth movements year after year. And I think that's something that all organizations in all sports struggle with, is when to you know, promote that young star or upcoming star, and get rid of a veteran that has been good for you for many years. It's really tough to do, hard to do, and I think but that's the success of the good organizations and teams, is those that know when to do it.
Yeah. Well, why did they get rid of Marcel Dion?
I think Marcel wanted out of Detroit. He wasn't happy there. And now, whether that was through management or through the fact that it was going to be a process of rebuilding that team or what, I just know that he wasn't happy. I don't think he was happy when he was drafted by them. And I know that initially he didn't want to be there long term. And so when a player doesn't want to be somewhere, I think that then for both parties, the organization and the player, that if you can make a deal that works for both, I think that's best. And you know, Marcel went on and had a wonderful career in LA, and ended up in New York, and you know, so I think Dale McCourt came Detroit way that time, and so they did okay.
Okay, so you went back to Detroit. How many years? How many days?
Just the 1 year.
Yeah. And
71-2.
yeah. Okay, so I guess that year there was rumblings, right? By 71 there was rumblings.
Yeah, that's when we started to talk about the fact that there might be a new league going. Players were being approached by people. It had to be sort of done on the QT, and but obviously the end result was that the league got going. It lasted 7 years, and some tremendous players from the NHL, and certainly some tremendous youngsters got their start in the WHA. So I think that even though it only lasted 7 years, that the history of the league is going to be remembered for forever. We'll never forget Wayne Gretzky, and we know that he got his start there. We'll never forget Mark Messier, and he got his start there. And of course, we know the impact that Bobby Hull and the European influence had in Winnipeg. We know the fact that Gordie got a chance to play with Marty and Mark because of the World Hockey, and so
American hockey flourished. Really.
And hockey became, if we can use the term, worldwide. And we can say all we want about the Summit Series in '72, but yeah, that did a lot for hockey. But I think the World Hockey Association did a lot for hockey too. We went overseas and played a lot of games over there in the various countries. We competed against them at the Izvestia Cup, and so a lot of things were done by that league that I think had a profound effect on the game of hockey, the style of play. I can remember the National Hockey League kind of snickering the year that Quebec beat us in the championship round, and there was some pretty high-scoring games. But if I remember correctly, the next year in the National Hockey League and in their playoffs, that their scores started skyrocketing. So I'd like to think that we were the forerunner of what was to come in all of hockey. But it was just it was a great experience, and I think we certainly did something here in Winnipeg that, like I say, has had a profound effect of the way the game is played today.
Okay, yeah. I remember that '77 series. Yeah, it was like Quebec was 9-3 and then 12.
Yeah,
12-2.
it was just it was a goaltender's nightmare. Other than the first game, we had to open up in Quebec, and I think we beat them 2-1 in the first game in Quebec, and then we had like about a 6-day layoff. Can't remember why, but there was an awful gap between the first and second game, and whatever I had going in the first game, I obviously lost after that, because the games became just a shooting gallery, and they beat us by 5 or 6, and we'd beat them by 5 or 6, and I always like to think that if we would have had the last game in our building, we may have been able to win the series, but they had it at their building and they beat us, and they had a great team that year, but I think we had a great team as well.
Yeah,
it was just one of those things. Like I say, it wasn't something that Richard Brodeur and Joe Daley are proud of. They won the championship, so they obviously felt pretty good about it, but. It was, I don't know why the games went that way, especially after opening up a playoff series with a 2-1 game. You're thinking, okay, this is really going to be a grind-out series, and the next thing you know, it's a shootout. And,
fans love it.
it was just one of those things. I mean, I was pretty fatigued by that time of the year. I had Bobby Crum came in to coach us here in Winnipeg, and he fell in love with me, and certainly played the heck out of me for 2 years straight. And when you're not used to playing 90, 95 games a year, and that's what you're thrust into, it took its toll on me. Probably shortened my career maybe by a year or two, but who knows? Everybody wants to play, and I enjoyed having it on my shoulders to carry the team as their goaltender. But when you win, it's wonderful. When you lose, you feel worse. And I know that that series troubled me for a long time, because it was just not the way it should have played out.
Kurt Larson didn't feel that way, right? He was,
Kurt Larson enjoyed his role with the hockey team. I know that you know his attitude was Joe's better, so Joe should play, and yet you know he was paid handsomely to be here. He was brought in along with the rest of the Swedes, and but Kurt was a good guy. Just you know, he didn't challenge me to play more, and was quite comfortable sitting on the bench eating popcorn.